Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Around the Big Ten podcast. I'm Marc Givler, joined by Chip Minnich, as always. Our team previews, schedule analysis continues. We're getting these all done here before Big Ten Media Days kicks off next week. I think it's Tuesday's the first day. So stay tuned for that. We'll have a bunch of that. We'll have all that stuff on the channel here, youtube.com/@SaturdayGlory. We will have all of the head coach press conferences, and we'll have a lot of the player interviews and things like that from Vegas. We'll have a team of people there. If you're interested in national stuff, Big 12 and SEC press conferences, as of recording here on July 15th, are all up. We'll continue to add the SECs later this week. So if you're interested in the national landscape, we have all that stuff on the YouTube channel as well. Chip, first of all, little break. I mean, we were rolling them out there. I had to get out of here for a week. How's the July going? We are so close. Media. We were talking about this. Media days are here. We are like a few days away from Big Ten media days, and then fall camps start like right after. Like I know, like Ohio State, because they play Texas at the end of August, and like the whole season kind of starts at the end of August this year versus being in September. A lot of fall camps are starting at the end of July this year, so we are like, man, we're like 2 weeks away.
Yeah, July is flying by. I'm one of these guys. To me, I would say that there is no such thing as, it's too hot. Being a lifelong Ohioan, that's just me. But I would certainly understand, for those people, that are, enjoying, maybe being inside on some of the really warm days, with their air conditioning. But I'm getting excited, like you said, Mark. We're with the various media days, in my humble estimation, when the Big Ten, when we have media days, and then very next week, knowing that all the different Big Ten teams in some capacity are going to be starting their fall camps. To me, it's kind of like the beginning of the season. I mean, no official games per se, but we're going to start to hear about reports out of the various teams in terms of how practices are going. Hopefully, and I say this with all sincerity, hopefully no injuries befall any Big Ten teams. But yeah, it's getting closer and closer.
That it is. And you can't talk about the Big Ten this year without mentioning Oregon. The Ducks won the Big Ten last year, the first season in the league, got the one seed in the playoff. Season did not end as they had hoped. Kind of a very, very rough outing, particularly that first half against Ohio State in the second round of the playoffs and their first game. But, they've kind of reloaded here. It's going to be some new names, some new faces, but a very high-level talent, again, throughout the roster at some of the most important positions. I like a lot of what they have coming back. And, Chip, I guess just your thoughts on this one thing here, because I get into this a lot of times with people. I think there's a sense out there that however you were playing at the end of the season, like carries over to the next season. I've never felt that way. I think there are certain things that can motivate you. Like I do think in a sense, like the loss to Ohio State in the playoff will serve some level of motivation for them, especially if they would maybe play Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game or something like that, or down the line. But I think the idea that they kind of ended with a thud means that they're going to all of a sudden it's going to, they're going to start the season slow, or if it would have been the other way around, if they would have ended the season hot, they're going to start the season hot. I've joked about this in the past. As someone who follows the Columbus Blue Jackets in the NHL, if the way teams finish a season led to how they started the next season, the Blue Jackets would be like 7-time Stanley Cup champions. They always have great Marches and Aprils when they're way out of the playoff picture. So I don't buy into hangovers and carryovers. I think every new year is a new team and a whole new different set of circumstances. How do you feel if you're an Oregon fan or an Oregon player or coach? I guess, how are you feeling right now as you get ready to start the season after what had to be kind of a brutal layoff after the way last year ended?
Well, I completely agree with you. I don't believe that there is that carryover, especially in today's college football world where the transfer portal is such a prominent feature and factor into not just Oregon, but for any college football team. And you're right. I think the fact that Oregon ended their season very unceremoniously at the hands of Ohio State would be something that, okay, if they wanted to, use it for motivation, certainly makes sense. But I think the reality is, when you look at Oregon, on either side of the ball. I mean, they had a tremendous amount of talent lost, not just through the transfer portal, but also to the NFL draft. So they were placing a lot of important positions with a lot of talented players. I certainly agree with something you said in your introduction, that it's more of a reload type situation for Oregon. This is not a team, in my opinion, is going to be taking any steps back. If anything, I think Oregon is well positioned to be a major factor, not only in the Big Ten race, but also in the college football playoff.
Yeah, and I think, look, I think the big thing here is I think the talent level is going to be really at the level it was last year for Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's not as proven. I think there are some areas of like, we think this is going to be really good, but we just haven't seen it yet, versus last year. I think you kind of knew what you were getting at pretty much every position for them. Even with the transfer guys, you had seen them do it at other places. And so you just kind of had this feeling that everything was going to just click. I think maybe there's a little bit more unknown this year, but I think the ceiling is just as high. So let's look at let's pop up the schedule here for the Oregon Ducks. And so we're looking at this again. If you're watching on YouTube, I apologize. I am going to read this annoyingly to you because there are people who are just going to be listening to this and are going to be like, what are you guys talking about? So here is Oregon's 2025 schedule. They start out home against Montana State, then home Oklahoma State, at Northwestern, home Oregon State, at Penn State, bye week, home Indiana, at Rutgers, home Wisconsin, bye week, at Iowa, home Minnesota, home USC, at Washington, and then Big Ten championship game if necessary. Chip, first thoughts on the schedule. It's interesting. It's kind of interesting schedule to me. I think it's a little bit kind of like sneaky tough, but like, what do you think?
I think from first glance that, I mean, it just sets up so well for them because, first thing that comes to mind is, I mean, there is no Ohio State on there. They don't play Michigan. They had no problem with either of those teams last year. The game that certainly jumps out, I think, for just about any college football fan is that game at Penn State at the end of September. That's going to be one of the big games that's going to help define the Big Ten race, as well as the college football playoff picture. I think just if I was an Oregon fan, my initial thought is, all right, at the end of September, if we're 5-0, we're looking pretty good to go back to back for a Big Ten championship game appearance.
Yeah, I agree. Like, obviously, like Montana State out of the gate, that's going to be a layup. But like, in Oklahoma State, this is not the Oklahoma State. This is not your older brother's Oklahoma State. I mean, they've hit some issues the last few years, but it does get a little weird. Like, so cross country to Northwestern, I don't think that's going to be a problem for them, but the cross country flight's kind of weird. And then you come back home and you play an Oregon State team that at this point probably hates you more than you hate them, just because of the way the conference realignment has shaken out. Like, this is even more so Oregon State Super Bowl than it ever was before, just because of the new conference affiliations and everything else. And you've got to deal with that. Now you're at home, but you have to deal with that before you fly back across the country to Penn State. So navigating games 4 and 5 here, I think, are vital for them. And that could be where you slip up a little bit. I think the rest of the conference schedule is very it's not easy. I think there are some games in there I think are maybe tougher than they look on paper. Like, at Washington's not going to be a picnic. Home USC is not going to be a picnic. Home Minnesota is not going to be a picnic. And then at Iowa, that's always a tough place to play. Indiana at home, coming off the bye, off the Penn State game. Like, there are some losable games there if you don't take your opponent seriously. But it's nothing like that road game at Penn State in September. So, like, it's very navigatable. Is that a word? But it's something like they should be able to handle that. But there are some, like, it's like if you put like 4 trap games in a row, it's like they have like 4 trap games in a row. Like, they can't, obviously they're not all trap games, but like these are games that are not like the marquee Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State matchups, but they are games where you better be paying attention.
Certainly. Yeah, that Indiana game might be more challenging than I think people realize. Indiana has a good team coming back. Now, to be fair to Oregon, I think they will be better tested than Indiana, but don't forget, Indiana, in one of our previous episodes, we talked about how that Indiana-Illinois game that's going to take place prior to this is going to have some repercussions within the Big Ten. I think the fact that game at Iowa on November 8th jumps out at me simply because that's kind of like the traditional area where Iowa comes, that they're laying in wait, so to speak, at Kinnick Stadium for opposing teams to come in, and Iowa plays extremely well, plays the game extremely close. So that would be a game that would certainly catch my attention. And like you said, Mark, I think at the end of November, going on the road at Washington, that's a traditional rivalry. Say what you will about Washington. I think they may not be as highly touted as Oregon will be coming into this season, but I think Washington's going to be a much better team than they were in year one. Under that coaching staff. So yeah, there are certainly opportunities for Oregon to, if they're not paying attention, certainly to take some false steps.
Yeah, that Washington game will be interesting, and they get to host Ohio State and Oregon this year, so those will be interesting games. We still have to do Washington, I believe, in our rundown here. We kind of talked about, we've talked about some sleeper teams in the Big Ten this year. Can this team be a sleeper? Can that team be a sleeper? And like Illinois is one we've kind of talked about, but we're not sure if they're actually a sleeper because of how well they did last year. So like Washington's the one for me that I think right now is flying under the radar. I think they've got something there at quarterback with Damon Williams. And if that's the case, I can see them being closer to what they were 2 and 3 years ago than what they were last year. Maybe not quite as good as 2 or 3 years ago, but closer to that than what they were last year, which was, essentially a team that was going to win their home games and lose their road games. So that's going to be an interesting one there at the end. And again, yeah, that Penn State game it's just going to be fascinating because you got the cross country flight almost to Chicago for the Northwestern game, which you'll win, but it'll be windy and ugly. And even in September, it will be weird. And then you'll go home off of that weird game that you weren't really that enthusiastic about, but you came out with the win. Now you got to go home and get up for the rivalry game. Then you got to fly cross country to Penn State, which is just not an easy place to play. So that's going to be, to me, the stretch is that games 4 and 5. Because once you figure that out, I think they'll hold serve at home for the most part. Could they lose at home? Sure, they could, but this is a team that's won $1 billion of their last 30 games. What is the home winning streak?
It's high. It's high. It's like 20 something.
Yes.
I don't have it in front of me, but it's up there. I mean, it's impressive.
And when you look at their schedule, there's some tricky home games, but there's nothing that you look at and say, oh, that's where the streak's going to end. You think they can hold serve there. It's like, okay, just avoid the weirdness at Kinnick or, at Husky Stadium there. And you may be able to run this thing if you can beat Penn State. So, I think they're very, very well equipped. Personnel wise, I'm a huge Dante Moore fan, and I get it. For the naysayers, you're going to say, well, what has he done? He was up and down in a kind of a weird situation at UCLA, kind of thrown in the fire early, had some bright spots, had some tough games, transfers, sits behind Dylan Gabriel. How can you be so high on him? Well, because I've seen him throw a football in person, and he's got a pretty special arm. Does he have the stuff that Dylan Gabriel's made of? We'll find out, because if he does, he's going to be really special. If he has the stuff Dylan Gabriel's made of, he's going to be a first round pick. But I think there's a very high ceiling there. I like a lot of their pieces on defense. Obviously, Uiagalelei Mateo, who I covered in high school, a very special talent there. They may have the most impactful freshman in the country in Decorian Moore at receiver. He is going to play early for them. He's going to be special. Big time explosive weapon. So I like a lot of their new faces. But again, they've got to do it. So I fully admit I am taking a bit of a leap of faith on a few guys, but these are guys I'm familiar with. And I think a lot of people, it wasn't just Oregon that thought Dante Moore was special or DeCorian Moore was special. The Ohio States and USC's and Alabama's of the world thought these guys were pretty special too. So just a very interesting mix. But again, I think a very high ceiling team where basically if Penn State doesn't get them early, it's hard to see. This is a team that'll probably be a lot better in November than they are in September. So if Penn State can't get them in September, this could be 12-0.
Yeah, one thing that kind of crossed my mind thinking about that Penn State game, and I'm not disputing the fact that, I'm happy for Penn State fans. They've got their big whiteout game moment, having a top opponent in Oregon coming in. And I also understand that getting to and from Penn State is not an easy thing. It's for any Big Ten team, especially one coming across the country like Oregon will be. But the one thing that kind of crossed my mind just thinking about it is, it's across the country and it's a difficult place to get to, and it's going to be a very difficult place to play, is that the night game in terms of the body clock factor for Oregon is not going to really be an impact. Like when you brought up earlier about going to Northwestern, that's going to be 9:00 in the morning body clock time for Oregon. So they might come out a little more sluggish against a team that's not nearly as talented in Northwestern. But conversely, when they play against Penn State, I think the fact that they're already going to be hyped for that game. And I think the fact that, their body clock, even though the kickoff's at 7:30 on NBC and it's going to be rocking, it's going to be almost like a regular home game time for them in terms of with their body clock. So I'm just looking forward to what promises to be a tremendous matchup.
Yeah, that's going to be one of the games of the year for sure. And again, we talked about this with Ohio State, Texas. I feel the same way about this Oregon Penn State game. The winner of that game is a virtual playoff lock. Certainly. Unless just the wheels completely come off with injuries, key injuries, and to decimate these rosters. The winner of that game is almost a lock for the playoffs, even though that game is played in September. And the loser of that game is still going to be okay. The loser of that game is still going to be feeling like they're everything's still in front of them. But I'm as fascinated as anyone to see that. Oregon's played in great environments before. They came in and beat Ohio State a few years ago. A bit of a younger Ohio State team that year with C.J. Stroud early in his career. But this Penn State team is probably a little bit more of a veteran presence. But this is they're used to playing in a great environment at home, and they're also used to hitting the road and playing some big time out of league or out of their comfort zone games. So it's hard to not be excited about that matchup. So with that said, Chip, let's do our game here. Best case scenario, worst case scenario for the 2025 Oregon Ducks regular season.
I'm going to take a stab at the powers of Marc Givler and not go 12-0, but it's certainly possible. The game at Penn State. I'm not saying that they will lose that, but that is the first one that kind of jumps out at me as being, certainly capable of being a loss. I mentioned earlier in the episode going on the road at Iowa in November. Always tough place to play at Kinnick, especially as the weather starts to get a little bit more unpredictable. And as you said, the fact that they're at Washington. So I'm going to say worst case, I think this team has 3 losses, but I can see them running the table like they did last year and making a return trip to Indianapolis for the Big Ten championship.
Yeah, my range is pretty narrow here. So I'm going to kind of follow a rule I've had over the years, which is I don't pick teams to go 12-0 because it rarely happens. And if you pick a team to just not go 12-0, even the best programs in America, you're going to be right 80-90% of the time. Then you go and you look back and they went 12-0 last year, so they're going to go 12-0 again. So I'm going to say 11-1 is their best case, even though I fully admit, even more so than Ohio State's, who I said I would be surprised if they went undefeated. I think Oregon has the best setup to go undefeated in the Big Ten. I think they have the best combination of schedule and talent to do it. but I think someone's going to get them, and it may be Penn State getting them early before they really gel. Got to be a little bit careful about Oregon State there. Before that, you're not looking ahead. And then, here's a weird scenario. What if they're 11-0 going into that Washington game and they don't really have anything to play for?
Very
they're
interesting.
in the Big Ten championship. They know they're in the playoff. What if they're just not, they just kind of get caught off guard on that too. I mean, that could even be a thing too. So I'm going to say 11-1, but I'm also on the flip side of that. I don't see this team going worse than 10-2. I think we're talking a 1-game range here where it's 10 wins or 11 wins, because I could they lose at Penn State, at Washington, or at Penn State, at Iowa? Yeah, they could. But I think 10-2 is almost a nightmare scenario, doomsday scenario, and they're in the playoff at 10-2. But I think that's their worst case, and I think they're more likely to win 11 than they are 10. I think 11-1 is a really solid bet for this team at this point. And so, if you can get them, I don't know. I don't have it in front of me. I probably should have done this before we started, but whatever their over/under win total, I'm guessing their over/under win total is 10.5. If you can get that at normal juice, -110, -120, if you can get over 10.5 wins, I think that's a pretty good bet for this team. But yeah, we'll see how year 2 goes in the Big Ten for Oregon, and how some of these new young dynamic weapons they have are able to impact games for them this fall. Chip, any parting thoughts here as we wrap this one up?
Just that this team, all credit to Dan Lanning. I mean, the job that he has done coming in and kind of building Oregon into, I'm just going to say it, more of a SEC team, because that's kind of what his background was. This team, for so many years had kind of the reputation for all the flash and dash and the sizzle and the creative uniforms, and that's all fine and good. But when it came to being a physical football team, when it mattered, Oregon, it happened on numerous occasions where Oregon would not be able up to the task against their opposition. That's completely changed under Dan Lanning. This is a physical football team. They still have a tremendous amount of talent. Now, granted, I agree with you, Mark. I think there's going to take some time for some that talent to gel, and for Dante Moore, the presumed starter at quarterback, to feel comfortable at the helm. But I think this team is well positioned to, like you said, I think not only be in the Big Ten championship, but also in the college football playoff.
Yep, completely agree. So yeah, we're both looking at Oregon as a very possible, if not likely, participant in the Big Ten championship game here this fall. So another good looking year on deck for Oregon. Again, it would be very shocking to me if they weren't a playoff team again. And I think there's a lot to be excited about there if you're an Oregon fan. So that'll do it for this one. We got more coming. We're going to get I promise you, we're a week out from Big Ten Media Days kicking off. We will have all of these run before Big Ten Media Days start. It may be an hour before Big Ten Media Days start, or the night before Big Ten Media Days start, but we will have these all done before Big Ten Media Days start. But appreciate everyone watching and listening. Stay tuned for more of these as we are well past the halfway point, and looking forward to talking Big Ten football.